Welcome to the VIA Cafe and welcome to this session of VIA Voices. My name is John Fanisil, Executive Director at VIA International, and here with the rest of the staff, we're hosting another session of our weekly conversations with people from along and across the US-Mexico border. We're very glad you're here. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for participating. And I'll introduce our guest, Graciela Zamudio, in just a minute. But let me just say a few quick words by way of welcome. The VIA Cafe is live online, and we encourage you to visit and to check out the different opportunities that are there to connect with people from along and across the border. Right now, there are some Spanish classes underway. I'm teaching a Spanish 201 class, and my compañero de trabajo, Daniel Watman, will be teaching a couple of classes coming up. I do want to just encourage you to visit viacafe.org. I do want to also just encourage you, those of you who are attending regularly, I'll say a word about this at the end of today's session. But we're trying to figure out a way that those of you who are attending regularly can get the sign-in information each week without having to register week after week after week. So we're thinking there are two ways that that can happen. One is there is at viacafe.org an opportunity to sponsor the VIA Voices program. And so those who might want to make a financial contribution to underwrite the program, we'd put you on a mailing list that you'd get the announcements week after week. But the other option we're thinking of is that we might create a program or a list of people we would consider champions of the VIA Voices program. And those champions likewise would get the email every week, and in exchange, we would simply ask them to help us spread the word, to invite friends, to share the events on their social media, to send ideas for other speakers who might be participants in our VIA Voices program. So keep your eye out for those two opportunities. Those of you who have been attending regularly should get an email from me very soon, within the next day or two, inviting you to either become a sponsor with a financial gift or to become a champion, lending your sweat equity, if you will, by helping us spread the word, and that way getting the weekly announcement of our VIA Voices programming.
And maybe include the board on that, since they fulfill both those roles.
There you go. And our board members, by all means, we welcome our board members as champions, staff. Many of our staff and board members are here online with us today. And by all means, we'll get those people on our weekly list. So thanks for, we've had a wonderful turnout the last couple of weeks. I'm so pleased to see the room filling up here today. This recording will be placed later this afternoon or tomorrow morning at the latest on our social media sites, especially Facebook page and YouTube. And then we'll send out an announcement also to those of you who have participated, letting you know that the recording is available for you to review and again to share with your friends. Very good. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our guest today, Graciela Zamudio. Graciela is a native of Mexico City, has been in Tijuana. I just learned chatting with her a few moments ago, has been in Tijuana for over 4.5 years now, and is the founder and leader of the nonprofit Asociación Civil called Alma Migrante. And I look forward to you getting to know Graciela a little bit, those of you who don't yet know her, a true champion of human rights. We're so fortunate to have her with us today. And I would invite you to just join me in giving a round of applause, please, as we welcome Graciela Zamudio to the VIA Cafe and to the VIA Voices. Graciela, I'm going to go ahead, if I may, and put a spotlight on you. Graciela, I thought I'd start by asking you, when we were talking about this conversation, we were talking about the different ways that we talk about human rights in the United States and Mexico. And I know that in the United States, we would more commonly talk about civil rights, or at least there's a long tradition in the United States of talking about civil rights. But in Mexico, would there also be a long-standing conversation about derechos civiles, or would the more common conversation be about derechos humanos? What's the difference between civil rights in the United States and human rights in Mexico?
Well, I think it should have to be to deal with the type of systems of law that both countries have. There are different because one is called like the common law, which is the one that we have in the US. And then in Mexico, we have a more, it's not really, you know, it's not that it's different from the civil rights perspective. It's more that the human rights perspective is rather international language. This is like the way in which you can identify not only the rights that are established in a country's constitution or in a country's law or jurisprudence, but also the human rights or the rights that are established in international treaties. So in our Mexican legal system, we talk about human rights as a block, identifying the ones that are in the law, the ones that are also in our constitution, and also in all those treaties that form all together with all these norms, a package of rights, of attributions of human beings in our territory. So it is not really that much a Mexico or US thing. It's the word human rights is more an international, directed one. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and while so some people in the United States, perhaps if they're involved, especially maybe if they're involved with an international NGO, would get used to talking about human rights or thinking of it in that international frame. But many Americans, I recognize, have a more limited experience and think in terms of US-based, you know, programs of civil rights. In a similar way, I think US people would think that, well, if somebody who's fighting for rights is probably a lawyer, maybe a civil rights lawyer, or maybe a civil rights advocate or a civil rights organizer. But when you and I were chatting, you use, and I've heard you on many occasions use the word defensor de derechos humanos, a defender of human rights. How in Mexico, where does that tradition of defending human rights come from? And how do Mexicans think about the challenge of defending human rights?
You know, I think many of the human rights defenders in Mexico don't know that they are human rights defenders. Yeah. The word defense comes again from the international language of the Declaration of the Human Rights Defenders. This is, I think this was established in 1998. And it, of course, foresees that there is some challenge to a right to be protected or guaranteed. So these challenges can come from several different origins. It can come from authorities, but it can come also from other persons that are not necessarily authorities, or just from a situation. You know, if we think about the human rights of the migrant people, it doesn't matter if a migrant person is alone. Their own situation of being in the migration context challenges their human rights, challenges their right to be next to their families, for example. It challenges their rights to food security. It challenges their right to access to justice. And when a migrant person or their family encounter, for example, DTO's members, you know, the drug cartels people in Mexico, if they encounter them in their way, then they also see their human rights threatened. And also sometimes, sadly, when they come to bump into an authority that is not complying with the law, then that interaction also produces a threat to their human rights to their human rights. So there are many people who think they are just nice, warm-hearted persons who want to teach, for example, their children to prepare sandwiches every Sunday to bring to the shelters for migrants. But they don't know that their actions are actually protecting the rights of migrants when they come to give them food. And as that simple action, there are so many actions that if you are doing for the purpose of guaranteeing or respecting the rights of another person, then that makes you a human rights defender. And this is not something that Alma Migrante invented. This is something that is written in the Declaration of Human Rights Defenders of the UN. So this is an internationally backed up institution, you know, the Institution of Human Rights Defenders all around the world. So they have a lot of rights that in a very quick summary, they are concentrated, or they're focused on having the right to defend, you know, to defend in all the several ways that they can do it. And also they have responsibilities like taking actual care of the person who they are wanting to protect, and also doing everything with the law, you know, legally speaking, without any kind of violence. Those are the three things that human rights defenders have to bear in mind all the time. But the rest, they're all rights to defend whatever and however they want to.
Yeah, so at times maybe from a US perspective, we would think of civil rights or human rights as something very specialized for people who have special training. I hear you talking about it more as a kind of a defendiendo los derechos humanos, defending human rights as a kind of a more of society, or that something in which everybody can participate. Is that true?
Absolutely. Actually, it's very important that you touch this point, because what happens in the US also happens in Mexico. People believe that when you use this word defend, you need to be an attorney. And if you're not an attorney, then you cannot use the law to defend. But the truth is that everybody can do actions to defend human rights. And especially legal actions can also be deployed by any person in order to be able to defend human rights. Probably the only one thing that you need to be an attorney to be able to do is to litigate, you know, because in federal Mexican courts and also in the local courts, it is a requirement that you have a license by the Mexican state. And, you know, locally also you need to have a license by the Baja California state in order for you to be an attorney or represent somebody in court. But the rest of the things, which are many, legally and not legally speaking, anybody can do them. So this is one of the most important messages that Alma Migrante always wants to give to our community, that it's up to us, that we can actually build with our own actions communities that are ethically and politically responsible for the protection and the guarantee of the human rights of all the people that form part of our communities. Meaning that our communities are plural, you know, it's not only the privileged ones who form part of them, but also all those people whose rights are threatened all the time, sometimes systematically.
Yeah, so a friend in the comment section, and I meant to mention that anybody participating is welcome to jot down questions using the chat function, and we'll be lifting up questions later on, but I'll lift one up now. A friend observing that, Andrea Rocha, observing that the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States has mobilized a large number of people, in some respects in that, with a larger sensibility of human rights, not just focused on civil rights or litigation, as you say. And so is there a sense of popular movements in Mexico? Is there any parallel or approximate parallel with movements of popular protest or popular support for human rights in Mexico?
Yes. Mexico has a huge community of human rights defenders in different sectors. Human rights defenders are probably not known to be as such, sometimes not even by themselves, but also sometimes not even by the population that forms the bigger communities where they move in. However, inside the communities of human rights defenders, there is a big movement of defense of human rights defenders in the country. Mexico, sadly, we need to say this in this type of conversations, is one of, I think it's the fourth country in Latin America where being a human rights defender or a journalist is more dangerous to be, you know, because Mexico kills human rights defenders. You know, there is a recommendation of CNDH, of the National Commission of Human Rights, of February in 2018, and in 2016. In that document, they explain that most of the challenges that human rights defenders have for their work have to do with attacks to their rights to life, and also to the rights to personal integrity. And the very few investigations that have started towards the finding the accountability of those perpetrators have not been solved. So CNDH establishes in Mexico there is a 98% of impunity when it comes to investigating this type of crimes against human rights defenders. So being such the situation, human rights defenders in the country have come to be very united in whatever sector they are. The most vulnerable sectors are sectors that deal with land, and also sectors that deal with ecology as well, with these other rights that are also like general rights for everybody. And well, also women, I mean, there are many topics, you know, but the fact that this is a reality makes it important in Mexico to have this type of a big movement to protect human rights defenders. So maybe that is something that in other areas where these type of things don't really happen that much, as Baja California, for example, maybe people don't know either what human rights defenders are and what they face in the rest of the country, or what they can get to face.
You mentioned the CNDH, the Comisión Nacional de Derechos Humanos, the relationship between, and you mentioned the challenges between civil society and authorities. What is the relationship between the movement for defending human rights and different authorities within Mexico? Governmental authorities, of course, we hear a lot in our news stories about police and you know, police corruption and this kind of thing. So how are the authorities and institutions of Mexico supporting of human rights and or threatening of human rights?
Well, this is a very difficult question, John, because I've met many authorities that are actually there to take care of human rights defenders as well as they take care of any other person. And investigations have shown that sometimes when human rights defenders or journalists are threatened or killed, there is very little evidence to link specifically the action of authorities with the actions of particular persons, you know, private persons, who make these actions, who deploy these actions. But the truth is that there is a lot of consent of the authorities, and this number that I just gave you is very revealing. If there are 98% of cases that haven't been investigated or solved to find the persons to be accountable for this type of acts, well, I think that the state, the Mexican state, is definitely collaborating in that silent way with this threatening against human rights defenders in the country. Yeah.
Well, and I mentioned that you were raised in Mexico City. I know you did some of your studies in Mexico, but then also in the United Kingdom. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
tell us about your experience in England. What was your education and experience in England like?
Well, it was fabulous. I have to say that by then, and still now, that has been the most expensive thing I've ever invested on. You know, my tuition fee. I thought it was very difficult to get a scholarship, and I never tried. You know, but when I arrived in there and I finished my LLM, I did it in the University of Nottingham, and it was such an amazing experience, you know, to be able to talk to fellow attorneys from all over the world, and also being able to touch this beautiful English culture that, you know, everybody thinks that English people are like not really human beings because they're so cold, but it's not true. I mean, they're very welcoming people. That university in particular back then had a program of family sheltering, you know. So amongst the people that worked in the university, each overseas student was assigned to one family, one English family, who you got to spend one weekend a month. So you could learn their dishes, their traditions, and spend time, like family time, with them the way you would do it with your own family. So I really remember my English family, and it makes me smile. Also, I had a step sister from Germany. You know, we were both assigned to the same family, and that was also very, very fun to see. You know, the culture clashing between Mexican and Germany siblings. And about the studies, well, also when I arrived, I remember my first class. I was very nervous because I thought I was just not going to make it. You know, that was the first time ever in my life that I lived in English, that I used English to live in any way, and academic standards were quite challenging for me. I remember the first day, some teacher made a question, and I was thinking about, like, you know, a nice answer to give. And when I was about to raise my hand, there was somebody else who had already talked. So I was feeling like, really, oh my God, am I going to make this? Really, am I going to be able to do this? But then, you know, I mean, it is great to be in a university ambience full of people who always go to the same lab to study and to read every day. And, you know, this is like, it's unto your soul. And I remember that when we were in exams period, I needed to submit 7 essays in one same deadline, which was like, you know, I could never imagine, not even writing in English, you know, like at an academic level. But well, I did make it, you know, every essay I imagine was better than the one before. And that was one of the big surprises in my life, that I was actually able to do it. Maybe my qualifications weren't like the best, but it was a huge achievement for me to finish my master, to do it successfully as well. And then also I got invited by the university to apply for a scholarship to stay there and do a PhD. Sadly, by then, maybe I was not as mature as I would have liked to be. But I decided that I wanted to come back to the judiciary in Mexico, where I was working for several years, because I needed to feel like strong economically again, instead of carrying on living as a student. And I'm not really sure whether this is an actual sorrow that I have, but I always think what would have happened if I had applied for that scholarship. Because really the time in the university has been one of the most enjoyable that I have had in my life. not also only because of all the cultures that you get to meet and eat, you know, because we had culture dinners
Yes.
basically every weekend.
Yeah.
But also because of the huge challenge that it meant to my brain that back then, and that I really think helped me think the way I do now.
So partly for your interest in human rights and partly for your own personal experience, you really do bring a very international perspective to your work. And I'm wondering, how do you look at Tijuana? You've been here 4.5 years. I'm interested to know what you think of Tijuana. Does it feel like home to you personally? And then professionally, how do you see the environment in Tijuana through the lens of international human rights?
You know, I think Tijuana is the Mexican Europe in so many ways. This thing of being just so free, you know, to just be whatever, think whatever, I think is something very treasurable for me, personally speaking. There was a time where I was wearing my hair in blue, and I remember I jumped into an Uber cabin here, and I was telling him, "Oh, do you think this is not too professional?" And he was like, "You look precious. Don't worry. You have to be yourself." You know. So those things, I think, they're very similar. And well, professionally speaking, I think there is nothing like Tijuana. There is something very special about it, which is this multicultural construction of the community where we work, which, by the way, I think is one of the reasons why human rights defenders in here are kind of armored against all those things that happen in other places. I think that Mexico would have to really be held accountable if that happened to volunteers from all over the world, right?
And
so
by armored, you mean so there's a degree of protection somehow?
correct.
But there's because of
Yes.
the attention from different parts of the world, there's a sense of
Yes,
interesting.
exactly. Places where human rights offenders have been killed in Mexico don't have this type of communities. They are very like isolated, and not many people or not many countries are looking in there, you know. So yes, definitely, I think that the situation, I mean, the fact that human rights offenders here come from everywhere in the world is definitely something that makes unique this community, and that also it protects us from Mexican typical ways of treating human rights offenders. And well, what else can I say about Tijuana? Tijuana is my home, you know. I mean, even during these pandemic times, I was surprised that everybody was going back home. All my friends and all my colleagues were as well doing it. And I had the opportunity to stay there with my family as well, because I had a trip in March. But you know, something like very instinctively and probably emotionally made me come back to Tijuana, come back where I think I belong right now. And I know my family home will never stop to be my home. That is like the place where you always can come back. But this is where I am, you know, this is my home. So, and well, I've been in the UK, I've been in the Netherlands, I've been in a very few countries, but I've loved them all. And I had not gotten so linked in my heart to any other place rather than Tijuana. So really it has something very special, and I think it is in the hearts of the people who I have met.
Thank you for that. It's very evident to me in your work and the way you speak about it that your love and care for Tijuana is so great. It's a blessing for us to have you as part of this community, this binational region of ours. I'm curious to know, just do you see the international dimension? There are a couple of questions. We'll hear more in just a minute, but You know, there's the institutional movement of human rights, the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, for instance. And there are there's movements of solidarity, of course, across the border. Do you see, and the United States is notorious, as my colleague mentions here, Andrea Rocha again, the United States is notorious for not participating very well necessarily in these international conventions and so forth. But do you feel like there's an international or inter-American movement for human rights that is building? How do you see that from your vantage in Tijuana? Is there progress being made in the international arena?
Well, definitely. I think that the Commission, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, has been reaching out to human rights defenders directly. We really need to see that more than reaching, they're actually acting to protect human rights defenders yet. But I think that being close is something really important, especially because developing that type of relationship on a long-term basis will help us to help the Commission react on time when things need to be taken care of immediately, you know, for urgencies. So yes, definitely this is not the only institution that has taken the lead in those terms. I think also other organizations like Amnesty International or Sahil have been focusing a lot into this movement of human rights defenders. However, I don't really think that any of those movements are particularly focused in human rights defenders of migrants. I think it's more like a general sector movement, which is definitely necessary, as I had said before. But I think it is, I mean, I believe from my work in Alma Migrante, what we focus on is in being effective. And that is why we limit our work by sector and also by community, you know, by a place, which in this case is Baja California. Because we believe that if we work enough time in a community, then probably that community will start later on helping other communities as well. So instead of having many communities involved in the same work.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to open it up now. We have a few questions in the chat room. If you have other questions, please feel free to share them there. And I'm going to invite my colleagues, Elisa Sabatini, Rigoberto Reyes, Aida Amador, any of who would like to lift up a question, either a question of your own or from the chat room.
Okay, we're going to start with Dan Watman's question, saying how the migrants and people of color rights are violated by police compared to how they are violated in the U.S. Border Patrol, and what's the relationship between local police and Border Patrol?
Well, if you mean in Mexico, it is, I think, a mirroring experience, because in Mexico, there has been, at least in Tijuana, there has been for more than 30 years, a collaboration between the police, the municipal police, and INM, which is the National Migration Institute, in order to and quicker. This would not happen if they wouldn't collaborate, because INM officials are not that many, they're very few. So because they are relying on the work of police officers, municipal police officers, that's how they can like fill in very quickly the migration stations and then start deporting the people. Whereas if they would do it on their own, as the law says they should, they only can do it, then they wouldn't be able to do it so quick. So I think this could, I'm not sure about that, but this could be just copied from what happens in the US, or what has been happening for a long time in the US, which is something really important to say, because police abuse is everywhere, is definitely everywhere. However, racism and also xenophobia is something that I think specifically in this area has been mirrored from the US. Or maybe the US learns as well. I don't really know, but I have a feeling that this area is particularly just mirroring what they say on the other side is correct. And without even knowing that it is illegal, you know, I mean, I think that police officers don't, even maybe the Migration Institute doesn't really know or didn't really know before that this type of collaboration was illegal. But that's what I think. That's what I imagine, that it is a mirroring situation.
Elisa, Rigo, any other questions you'd like to ask or like to lift up from the chat room?
I have one here from Elisa. Can you please describe the work you are doing to train human rights defenders and what that means for individual defenders and what do they do?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is, can you please describe the work you're doing to train human rights defenders?
Yes, of course. Yes. Well, Alma Migrante is focused on creating and implementing strategies of access to justice within the community of human rights defenders in Baja California. And this is something that we do with workshops about access to justice tools. This is not the only one thing we do. We also give them a program of companionship for them to have like somebody close to them, giving a follow-up to their cases that they want to undertake and be responsible for. And also we give them technical assistance for whatever leadership that they want to undertake by themselves. We just like pack them with whatever legal thing that they need to make it efficient. So with these three services, we help the process of working all together with the same type of a strategy to do something different, to stop some type of problem that we all have as a community. Workshops are very far away from just receptive exercise. It is more a real experience one. Also, of course, we give them the information. And also something that we always try to do is to connect them with the networking that is relevant to make the tool work. For example, one day we gave a workshop on a petition for precautionary measures for the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. So we had the staff of the commission giving part of the workshop so that they could talk to the human rights defenders in here and be able to actually get to know them, get to know their struggles. And also by this networking, we ensure that people in the future, like human rights defenders in the future, when they want to use this type of tools, they already have the email where they can send a petition. They already know the criteria of the people who are back there in Washington receiving this type of petitions. And also they know what type of questions they can make to them and maybe even dial them, you know? So this makes the tool way closer to the people than if it was just information, what we gave to them. We always try, yeah, I was just going to close saying that we always try our actions, make them independent from our future actions so that they can deploy themselves whatever they want or they feel is important for migrants to be done. Because we always rely on the fact that they are the ones who are really the most experienced in what happens to the population that they serve.
Graciela, a couple of people are asking about the collaborative effort in Tijuana, your experience of it, or your experience of perhaps across San Diego, Tijuana as well. Do you find a collaborative spirit and a collaborative networks in your work defending human rights? And maybe especially how do universities, say in Mexico and los Estados Unidos, How are the universities, do they play a part in that collaborative role?
Well, you're right, John. Collaboration is huge in this region. To start locally, I would say there are several organizations that are always doing workshops or that are doing, for example, gatherings to talk about different types of human rights issues and their struggles as well. That is something very important, being communicative about what happens. Actually, La Iglesia del Faro and also the Crisis Center and Alma Migrante have been hosting a series of this type of reunions with shelters throughout the pandemic era, the pandemic time. Also, there are many organizations that do, for example, cultural work and that involves everybody in the community, like Espacio Migrante, for example. And there are many shelters. There are shelters that are so traditional, you know, that sometimes they just throw out a party to celebrate migrants and then everybody goes. And when it comes to work, we have seen it in the protests as well, which is something really powerful. In here, I thought, you know, Tijuana maybe was very experienced in protests. Later on, I realized that I learned that it's actually something new, but it is super strong when all human rights defenders get together to fight for something in particular. And then when we talk about the binational community that we have, in Alma Migrante, we have found wonderful allies that are ready to speak about our work or share what we do, and also to empower us with other allies. For example, some of our donors we have found by other organizations in the US who talk to them about our work, and then they come and support us. And that is something really important, definitely. Also, for example, Alliance San Diego is one other big ally. They really try to amplify all the work that they look at that has been done in Tijuana. And this is something super important. We would like to see in the future this collaborative work to advance into a litigation level, for example. We would like to see lawsuits occurring at the same time from both sides of the country, both sides of the borderline, because we believe that sometimes when you lock in a law on one side and then you lock in the other law on the other side at the same time, maybe that can create a struggle between the collaboration of the authorities that collaborate illegally to criminalize migrants. So there's a lot still to do, I think, but there is already a lot that has been done. And when we talk about universities, well, I really love USD. You know, they have helped us a lot in many ways. They have they have assigned entire classes of students to entire groups of students to revise some infographies that we have, for example. And especially the University of San Diego right now is involved in one of our most important projects, which is to tell the stories of human rights defenders of Baja California in this region. So they lend us students to be trained by the specialists in digital narratives, for example, which is one first tool of that project. And once they have trained them in doing that, students are the ones who form the team of production of these digital narratives for human rights defenders. And we have learned from human rights defenders who have participated in this project that they're super happy because the students are there to support them, but never to tell them what to do or never to lead them. I mean, really they have been so well trained, and they have absorbed this training so well that they promote the freedom of human rights defenders when they speak their worth or their truth about their work. So these are just two examples of beautiful collaborations that we have had with the University of San Diego. And also, well, in this later project, we also have involved the University Iberoamericana here in Tijuana.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Before we close, I do want to take the opportunity to share with you all just this glimpse of the Via Cafe. Thank you again, Graciela. I'm going to come back to you with one final question in just a minute.
Sure.
But if you visit the Via Cafe, you'll see the opportunity to get the ticket to our next event a week from today. I'll tell you about that in just a minute. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour also, we're encouraging people who might want to become sponsors of this program to do so with a $100 gift. And for that, you'd receive the email with all of the information about upcoming Via Voices events. And then, as I also mentioned at the top of the hour, we're also inviting people who might want to become, I think we're going to call them champions of Via Voices, without needing to make a donation specifically for this purpose. But if you were to become a champion of Via Voices, we would put you on our list. You'd receive the email weekly with all the information about the upcoming events. And we would simply ask you to help us spread the word, and also to share your ideas about speakers that you might like to hear, and to help us spread the word about Via Voices. Just to give you an idea of what's coming next week, there's Graciela, our guest today. And next week on June 23rd, we'll be chatting with Pedro Rios of the American Friends Service Committee. And Pedro and I have been chatting offline, and I wanted to bring the conversation online, this question of what border communities are learning from Black Lives Matter and defund the police. So I hope you'll join us, plan to join us next Tuesday. Again, you can purchase a $0 free ticket online, or if you'd like to become a sponsor, please make a donation online. Or if you'd like to be a champion, let us know, and we'll add you to our list and simply ask you to help us spread the word. I do want to close with one final question before we let you go, Graciela. And I want to ask you if you would just share with me the pleasant and exciting news that you heard recently, or that is happening today with your brother. Your brother is a physician in Mexico City. Tell us what's happening with your brother.
Well, thank you so much for that question. This is something really, it makes me feel very proud. My brother is working in 2 hospitals in Mexico City, only taking care of patients of COVID. And one, he's in the urgency area, and in the other one, he is in the triage, where patients that are more grave are being taken care of. And the second one is a military hospital. So today, I don't really know in what location in Mexico, but somewhere in the country, he has been called by the president together with other 6 of his colleagues who have been temporarily hired by the military hospital to have an acknowledgement by the president for their hard and remarkable work in the war against COVID. So I'm really proud. It makes me feel really happy, because the fact that he's been on the front line all these months has kept all our family really worried. And he's just a very passionate person, and he sees everything with joy, and his work especially with joy. So this is an award for him, and I'm super proud about him.
And tell us his name, your brother's name.
Sure. The name of my brother is Edgardo Eufemio Zamudio Campos.
Well, we give thanks for Eduardo, and we give thanks for you. Will you join me in a big round of applause for Graciela Zamudio? From the very first time that I heard the name Alma Migrante, I loved the name Alma Migrante. And when I met Graciela, I thought, oh, now here's an organization where the leader of the organization incarnates the name. And Graciela, just kind of such a privilege to work with you, to get to know you, to collaborate with you. And so appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. Friends, again, thank you for joining us. Let us know how we can stay in touch, sign up for next week's event, or let us know if you'd like to be on our ongoing list. And for Via International, the Via Cafe, and this Via Voices series, we thank thanks once more to Graciela Zamudio about Alma Migrante.
Thank you for the
And
invitation.
you're very welcome. And we'll see you next time. Thanks everybody for joining. Bye-bye.